So I'm looking at our study guide here, and I will fill in some of our literary elements. I also have a ultimate literary analysis study guide that will give us all the basic literary elements and literary devices. So the first one we have would be genre, and genre is just a category system for books, music, and actually art and music. You could say there's genres for everything. And if you ever looked at Netflix, they would have comedy, tragedy, suspense, horror, scary movies. So genre is just a category system. And then you would have your fiction. So fiction would be stories that are fake or made up. I always remember fiction is false. And we can also say there are many genres of fiction. This book, A Long Walk to Water, is known as historical fiction. Although Selva's story is true, Naya's story was added for, we could say, for the literary effects. I don't want to give anything away. So then we would have, for literary effects, then we have nonfiction. Those would be your true stories. So stories that actually happened. Or we could say articles that are the opinions of the author. Because you could have something be an article or an opinion piece. And technically, that wouldn't be, it may or may not be true, but no matter what, it's the person's opinion. So nonfiction is your newspapers, articles, non-biography books, or historical books. Now, when we have our narration, so narration, there are your three types. So we can have first person, second person, or third person. So I would say narration is how an author chooses to tell the story. So you could say first person narration means that the character is in the story. So the reader would see I, me, my pronouns. Then you would have second person narration means the author is talking directly to the reader. Examples of second person narration would be cookbooks or adventure novels. If you ever read an adventure story when it says, you approach the bridge, turn to page 6 to cross the bridge, turn to the next page to take the other path, something along those lines, where you would see the pronoun you. In a cookbook, you have you will need 5 cups of flour, 2 cups of sugar. That's second person because it's talking directly to the reader. Some stories will do this too. You might see the narrator drawing in the reader. That means that the author is really trying to get the reader's attention when they make the reader a character in the story. And last but not least, because it's the most popular, well, not maybe, sort of, sometimes, we have third person narration means there is an unknown narrator recounting the events or discussing, or an unknown narrator telling the story. So, and I remember this. So if we could say, in third person narration, the reader will see he, she, they, them pronouns. So, how I try to remember this is I am the first person. I always come first. You, you can come second. And he or she, them, they over there, they have to come third. So that's how I remember it. I am the first person. So as long as you remember that you always put yourself first, you can try to remember first person narration means the narrator's in the story. And then we would have two types of point of view. So wait a minute. When we're talking about how we know the point of view is really whose thoughts and feelings do we know? So I can put here, the reader can identify the type of point of view being used by trying to find which characters' thoughts and feelings are written about most. So in this, it's definitely, we could actually say that this story is limited point of view because we're only going to get the points of view of Naya and Selva. And then remember, there's a lot of other characters that we'll meet. So the fact we only know Naya and Selva's point of view, we would have a limited point of view. Then when we talk about our setting, all right, so the setting in this story particularly, and we can fill this in as we go, so you can have notes for this. The setting is going to have two different settings. So setting is always the time and place that the story is set, or that the story is taking place in. I don't like to use the word in the definition, and technically set and setting is a word. So let's say the time and place that the story is taking place. And then we can say it also has to do with your context here. So when describing the setting, it can be helpful to add the context as well, because you could have a story and it's taking place like in August of this year. We don't really have anything going on. But if you chose one day to set your story, and let's say that day was the day of like a hurricane. So the context is important because you could be a regular day in America or wherever you are, but if there's like a natural disaster, that's part of your setting. The conflict it might cause. Or in the case of Selva, we're in a conflict. So the settings in this story are different because Selva's setting, he's in the context of a civil war. Naya's setting, she's technically not, there's no active fighting going on, but you could say it's a very barren place that she's living and it lacks infrastructure. Infrastructure is what could bring the water or and really and bring water or medical treatment. Infrastructure could be like a hospital too or an airport. All right, so you would have your character, those are just the people or animals in a story, because sometimes you get stories where animals talk, right? So a protagonist, is the main character that has a conflict or problem. And then you would say the antagonist is the character that causes the problem for the protagonist. Now, a lot of times people want to say that the antagonist has to be a villain. This is not always true because let's say you had a story about, and your protagonist was a kid that was going to throw like a party. And then the protagonist kid finds out that his parents are going to be coming home early. So now the protagonist has a problem that is caused by his parents, but his parents aren't evil supervillains, right? They're just going to come home and they're probably going to be mad at him, but they're not going to they're not villains. So an antagonist does not have to be a villain. It just has to be a person causing conflict for the protagonist. Same with like a love story. If you had a kid that had a crush on someone, just because a person doesn't have the crush on them back doesn't mean they're a villain, right? And there's a lot of stories like that. Characterization. Now, characterization would be personality traits that describe the character's, you could say, I want to say emotional or mental well-being, something along those lines. So you're just looking for personality traits. Now, common mistakes I see. You might characterize a person as rich. Now, rich isn't technically part of a person's personality. Maybe you notice that the person might be greedy. Then you would want to characterize that person as greedy. And if you can, and maybe wealthy, you could sometimes materialistic would be like a wealthy person that really likes their stuff, something along those lines. Conflict, we have 7 types. So conflict is just the obstacle or problem the protagonist faces throughout the story. A story's conflict is typically resolved in a story's climax. That would be the most suspenseful moment. And there would be our 7 types. So you would have internal conflicts are ones where the character has to face a difficult decision. So character versus self. Then you could have your external conflicts. Those are all your typical character versus character, character versus nature, character versus supernatural. So we could say external conflicts are those that the character faces outside of their own mind. These conflicts include character versus character, character versus society. That's when the whole society is against them. But it doesn't always have to be a big old society. So let's say you were reading a story about a kid at school and everyone was being mean to her in her classroom. Technically, the girls' classroom is not all of society, right? But you could say on like a miniature level that everyone around her is against her, so therefore she has a conflict with society. It's not an equal playing field. It's like one person against a group. So that's how character versus society can fit. Also, sometimes people might say character versus government. If you had like a government or a king or something that was putting in all these laws, the king technically is a person, but they're like representing society, you could say. All right, so then we would have character versus nature. That's going to be your Lost at Sea stories, your tornado stories, any survival ones. Also, viruses. So if you were reading a book about some type of like plague or pandemic, that is character versus nature. Because remember, viruses come from nature. All right, so you would have that character versus supernatural. Those are just your typical ghost stories, right? You got character versus technology. Fun fact, when I was in school, character versus technology fell under character versus supernatural. And then around like the late 90s, they were like, "Ooh, wait, technology is not supernatural anymore. It's really happening." So they made its own separate category. And then last, you have character versus fate or destiny. Really, if you wanted to use this, you could do it for any story. Like Harry Potter, character versus fate or destiny. Was he going to defeat the head wizard guy? I forgot his name. Now, you could say that was his destiny to do that. You could almost always work in a character versus fate destiny conflict if you wanted to. Imagery, that's going to be when the author writes about the reader's 5 senses. 5. So if the reader can feel, touch, taste, smell, hear, or see multiple sensory descriptions, the section of the text could be identified as using imagery. So imagery is just something an author uses to make the reader's experience feel more realistic. And then, of course, we're going to have our theme, and that would just be your author's message. So a theme is a broad message that the text relays to readers. Themes can include love conquers all, money doesn't buy happiness, war is devastating, etc. Any of these things could be like broad themes. And then you would have all of our figurative language. Well, not all of it. There's a lot of figurative language. So a metaphor, we can say here. So our metaphors is when you make a direct comparison. Sometimes metaphors can be confusing. So you could say, we could maybe say, he is the devil when he is angry. So that would be saying that when someone's angry, they might have anger issues, they get very mean and evil. That could be a metaphor. Then the simile, I could make this same comparison. I could say he is like the devil when he is angry. And now I've made the same comparison, but I used like or as. Personification. So I'm going to put here, simile is a comparison using like or as, and then your metaphor is going to be a direct comparison, not using like or as. And then our personification. This is when an author gives human traits to a non-human entity. So if I was going to talk about, I don't know, my computer, I might say, you could write, my computer stares at me blankly while I think of the words to write for my essay. Your computer cannot stare at you. The computer's just sitting there. So to make it saying it's staring, you're giving it human qualities, and now you've created some personification. And the hyperbole here is just your extreme exaggeration. You might use these all the time. If somebody was to say, I was walking at the fair all day and my feet are killing me. Obviously, if someone's feet were killing them, that would be a problem. So this would be hyperbole. Another example, you could say anytime somebody writes, I told you a million times to take out the garbage. It's very unlikely that somebody told someone a million times. So this is take out the garbage. So this is going to be a hyperbole, an extreme exaggeration. And those would be our literary element notes that we will use when we're reading and analyzing A Long Walk to Water.